Billionaire divorced received an anonymous letter. Inside was a photo of his ex-wife holding twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The 42nd floor of the Whitmore Tower offered a view that most people would kill for. Manhattan stretched endlessly below, a concrete jungle of ambition and broken dreams. But Jasper Whitmore barely glanced at it anymore. At 37, he had grown accustomed to being above it all, literally and figuratively. His corner office was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars, and awards lining the walls from various medical technology innovations his company had pioneered. Everything was perfectly organized, sterile, and cold, much like the man who occupied the space. Jasper stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with dark brown hair that he kept meticulously styled, piercing blue eyes that could cut through corporate lies in seconds, and a jawline that photographers had once begged to capture. He wore his success like armor, custom-tailored Tom Ford suits, Swiss watches that cost small fortunes, and an air of untouchable confidence that made grown men nervous during board meetings. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way his assistant, Caroline, had avoided his eyes when she brought his afternoon coffee. Maybe it was the unusual silence that seemed to press against the windows despite being 42 floors above the city's noise. "Mr. Whitmore," Caroline's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts about the Henderson merger. "There's an envelope on your desk. It wasn't there when I brought your coffee 15 minutes ago." Jasper frowned. Security in the building was tighter than Fort Knox. No one entered his office without his permission or Caroline's knowledge. "What do you mean it wasn't there?" "I'm not sure, sir. I stepped out to make copies, and when I returned to water your plants, it was just there." He turned toward his desk, and sure enough, a plain white envelope sat in the center of his leather desktop pad. No postmark, no return address, just his name written in elegant handwriting that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Jasper approached the envelope like it might explode. The handwriting was feminine, careful, but not one he recognized. At least, not immediately. He picked it up with steady hands, though something deep in his gut was already churning. Inside was a single photograph. The world stopped. Leora Bennett, his ex-wife, sat in what appeared to be a nursery, holding 2 babies. Twins. A boy and a girl, both with the same dark hair that Jasper saw in the mirror every morning. The timestamp in the corner of the photo read a date that made his blood run cold. The babies were approximately 1 year and 3 months old. His knees went weak. Jasper sank into his leather chair, staring at the image with the intensity of a man trying to solve an impossible equation. Leora looked different, softer somehow, her chestnut brown hair longer than when she'd lived with him, her green eyes carrying a warmth he hadn't seen in the final months of their marriage. She wore a simple lavender sweater that brought out the natural rosiness in her pale complexion, and she was smiling at the babies with a tenderness that made his throat close up. The babies. God, the babies. The little boy had Jasper's distinctive cleft chin, and the girl had eyes that were unmistakably his shade of blue, even in the photograph. His hands trembled as he set the photo down on his desk. The math was impossible to ignore. If these children were 1 year and 3 months old, Leora would have been pregnant when she left him. Pregnant and never said a word. The memory of that day crashed over him like a tsunami. 2 years ago, he'd come home from a business trip to find their shared penthouse eerily quiet. No goodbye note, no tears, no fight. Just Leora's keys on the kitchen counter and half of her belongings gone. When he'd called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. When he'd tried to reach her through friends, they'd said she needed space. His pride had prevented him from pushing further. "She'll come back when she's ready," he'd told himself. She always does. But she never did. Now, staring at this photograph, Jasper realized how catastrophically wrong he'd been about everything. The woman he'd shared 5 years of marriage with, the woman who used to trace patterns on his chest while he read financial reports, who made coffee exactly the way he liked it without being asked, who once told him she dreamed of having a house full of children, had been carrying his babies when she walked away, and he'd let her go. His intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Whitmore? The Henderson representatives are here for the 3 o'clock meeting." Jasper stared at the photograph, memorizing every detail. The way Leora held the babies like they were the most precious things in the world. The contentment on her face that he'd never been able to give her. the way the afternoon light caught in her hair through what looked like a window behind her. "Sir?" Caroline's voice was more insistent now. He slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket right over his heart. "Cancel the meeting. Cancel everything for the rest of the day." For the first time in his adult life, Jasper Whitmore had no idea what to do next. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His perfectly controlled world had just shattered into a million pieces, and there was no putting it back together again. The man who had built an empire on making impossible decisions found himself completely paralyzed by a single photograph of the life he'd unknowingly abandoned. What would you have done if you discovered you had children you never knew existed? Jasper didn't sleep that night. He'd paced the marble floors of his penthouse until dawn, the photograph burning a hole in his jacket pocket. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leora's face, peaceful, maternal, complete in a way she'd never been with him. By 6 a.m., he was back in his office, but not for work. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he needed: Marcus Reed, his old college roommate who now ran a high-end private investigation firm. "Jasper?" Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Do you know what time it is? I need you to find someone." Discreetly. There was a pause. Marcus had known Jasper long enough to recognize when his friend was in crisis mode. "Who are we talking about?" "Leora. Leora Bennett." The silence stretched longer this time. "Your ex-wife?" "Jasper, what's going on?" Jasper walked to his window, watching the city wake up below. "I can't explain over the phone. How quickly can you get me information?" "Depends on what you need. Basic whereabouts? A few hours? Deep background? Give me a day. Everything. Where she lives, works, who she spends time with. But Marcus, no one can know about this, not your team, not anyone. You're scaring me, man. This isn't like you." Jasper's grip tightened on the phone. "Just do it." By noon, Marcus had called back with preliminary information. Leora was living in Charleston, South Carolina, working as a curator at the Brennan Museum of Fine Arts. She'd been there for almost 2 years, since right after their divorce was finalized. She rented a small house in the historic district, kept a low profile, and had no social media presence. "That's the weird part," Marcus said over the secure line. "It's like she deliberately disappeared from the radar. No credit cards registered to her maiden name. No public records beyond the basics. She's living like someone who doesn't want to be found, or someone who's protecting something precious," Jasper thought. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "I did some digging into her employment records. She took a 6-month leave of absence when she first started at the museum. Medical leave." Jasper's hand instinctively moved to his jacket pocket where the photograph waited. 6 months. The timing lined up perfectly with when the babies would have been born. "Send me everything you have," Jasper said. "And Marcus?" This conversation never happened. After hanging up, Jasper found himself staring at the wall where their wedding photo used to hang. He'd taken it down 6 months after she left, unable to look at Leora's radiant smile anymore. She'd worn her grandmother's vintage lace dress, her auburn hair swept up in an elegant chignon that showed off the delicate curve of her neck. She'd been 28 then, full of dreams about the life they'd build together. He remembered how she used to talk about children during their engagement. "I want a house full of laughter," she'd said one evening as they walked through Central Park. Little feet running down hallways, bedtime stories, Christmas mornings with toys everywhere. "Maybe someday," he'd always replied, focused on building his empire. "When things settle down." But things never settled down. There was always another merger, another deal, another opportunity that demanded his attention. And somewhere along the way, Leora had stopped talking about children. She'd stopped talking about a lot of things. The photograph had been sent by someone who knew them both, someone who understood the significance of what they were revealing. But who? And why now? His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Found something interesting. Leora bought a house 3 months ago. Not renting anymore. How does a museum curator afford a $400,000 house in Charleston's historic district?" Jasper's blood ran cold. Had she sold something? Demanded money from him somehow? The divorce settlement had been generous, but not that generous. Another text arrived. "Also found this in the Charleston Observer archives." A link appeared, and Jasper clicked it with trembling fingers. It was a small article from 6 months ago about a local art exhibition, and there, in the background of a group photo, was Leora. But she wasn't alone. She was pushing a double stroller. The photograph was blurry, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the careful way she maneuvered the stroller through the crowd, or the protective stance of her body as she navigated around other people. This wasn't a woman babysitting for a friend. This was a mother. Jasper sank into his chair, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. Guilt? Anger? Grief for the years he'd lost? All of it crashed over him at once. He looked at his calendar packed with meetings and calls that had seemed important this morning. Now they felt like background noise to the only thing that mattered. His children were in Charleston. And despite every rational voice in his head telling him to call his lawyers, to demand a paternity test, to approach this like the business problem it clearly was, Jasper found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He cleared his schedule. The next morning, he would drive to Charleston himself. No lawyers, no intermediaries, no corporate solutions. For once in his life, Jasper Whitmore was going to face the consequences of his choices head-on, even if it destroyed everything he thought he knew about himself. The 4-hour drive to Charleston felt like the longest journey of Jasper's life. He'd taken his Aston Martin instead of flying, something about needing the time to think, to prepare for whatever he might find. But as he pulled into the historic district, with its cobblestone streets and antebellum mansions draped in Spanish moss, he realized nothing could have prepared him for this. Charleston was the antithesis of Manhattan. Where New York was steel and glass reaching toward the sky, Charleston was warm brick and wraparound porches that invited you to sit a while. The pace was different here. People actually made eye contact. Children played in front yards and the air smelled like magnolia blossoms instead of exhaust fumes. It was exactly the kind of place Leora used to dream about. "I want our children to have grass stains on their knees and dirt under their fingernails," she'd once told him during a rare weekend at the Hamptons. "I want them to know what it feels like to catch fireflies and have lemonade stands." He'd been on his phone during that conversation, closing a deal with a pharmaceutical company. He'd nodded absently and promised they'd talk about it later. Later never came. Now, driving through Leora's chosen sanctuary, Jasper felt like an intruder. His car was too expensive, his clothes too formal, his entire presence a stark reminder of the world she'd deliberately left behind. Marcus had texted him an address, 47 Magnolia Street. When Jasper turned onto the tree-lined road, he had to pull over and catch his breath. The house was perfect. A charming 2-story Victorian painted in soft yellow with white shutters and a wraparound porch decorated with hanging ferns and rocking chairs. A white picket fence enclosed a small front yard where children's toys were scattered on the grass. A red tricycle, colorful chalk drawings on the sidewalk, and a sandbox shaped like a turtle. This wasn't just a house. It was a home. Jasper parked across the street, hidden partially behind a massive oak tree. He felt ridiculous skulking around like some kind of stalker, but he couldn't bring himself to walk up to that front door. Not yet. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door opened and Jasper's heart stopped. Leora stepped onto the porch and she was even more beautiful than he remembered. Her chestnut hair was longer now, falling in soft waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple mint green sundress that showed off her naturally pale complexion. She moved with the confident grace of a woman comfortable in her own skin, something she'd lost during the final years of their marriage. But it was what came next that nearly brought him to his knees. 2 toddlers tumbled out the door behind her, giggling and chattering in the way only small children can. The little boy had dark hair that stuck up in cowlicks exactly like Jasper's had at that age, and when he turned toward the street, Jasper could see the unmistakable cleft in his chin, the Whitmore family trademark. The little girl was pure sunshine, with lighter brown hair that caught the afternoon light and eyes that were startlingly blue even from a distance. She wore a tiny pink dress with white sandals, and she moved with the fearless curiosity of a child who'd never known anything but love and safety. "Ezra, stay close to Mama," Leora called, her voice carrying across the quiet street. That voice, warm honey with just a hint of southern drawl she'd picked up, hit Jasper like a physical blow. Ezra. She'd named their son Ezra. The little girl, Mira, he remembered from the photo, toddled toward the garden where bright flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. She pointed at a butterfly and clapped her hands with pure delight. Jasper gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. These were his children, his blood, his DNA, his legacy running around in tiny sneakers and sun hats. They were perfect and happy, and completely unaware that their father was sitting 50 feet away, afraid to breathe too loudly. Leora seemed to sense something. She straightened and looked directly toward his car. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met across the distance. Jasper froze, certain she'd recognized him, but then Ezra called for her attention and she turned away. Had she seen him? Did she know he was there? He watched as she lifted Mira onto her hip and took Ezra's hand, leading them toward a small swing set in the backyard. The ease with which she managed both children spoke of countless days of practice, of a routine built around their needs and happiness. This was the life she'd built without him. This was what she'd chosen instead of their marble penthouse and charity galas and evenings spent in separate rooms because he was always working. As Jasper sat in his expensive car watching the family he'd unknowingly abandoned, one thing became crystal clear. Leora hadn't just left him. She'd rescued herself and their children from a life that would have suffocated all of them. The question now was whether he was brave enough to admit that, and whether it was too late to become the man they deserved. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Mr. Chen called about the Tokyo merger urgent. For the first time in his adult life, Jasper turned off his phone without reading the rest of the message. Some things were more important than billion-dollar deals. He just hoped he hadn't realized it too late. Jasper checked into the historic Charleston Inn under an assumed name, something he'd never done in his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd built his reputation on transparency and directness was now hiding behind fake credentials like a common criminal. His suite overlooked the harbor, but he couldn't focus on the picturesque view of sailboats and historic mansions. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photograph that had started this entire journey. In the soft Charleston evening light, he noticed details he'd missed before. A small scar on Leora's left hand that hadn't been there during their marriage, laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of genuine happiness, and something else that made his chest tighten. She was wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she'd treasured above all her other jewelry, the one she'd worn on their wedding day. He'd assumed she'd sold it along with everything else when money got tight after their divorce, but she hadn't. She'd kept it, and she was wearing it while holding their children. His phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. "Marcus, I've got more information, and you're not going to like it," his friend said without preamble. "Just tell me." I tracked down Leora's medical records from Charleston General. She was admitted for an emergency C-section 2 years ago. Complications during delivery, hemorrhaging, according to the report. She was in intensive care for 3 days. Jasper's blood went cold. 3 days? It gets worse. The babies were premature, born at 34 weeks. They spent 6 weeks in the NICU. Jasper, she went through all of that alone. No family listed as emergency contacts, no father mentioned on the birth certificates. The room began to spin. While he'd been closing deals and flying to board meetings, Leora had been fighting for her life and the lives of their children. She'd faced every parent's worst nightmare. Premature babies, medical complications, weeks of uncertainty, completely alone. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "I found the financial records. The medical bills were astronomical, even with insurance. Someone paid them off in cash about 6 months after the birth. Who? That's where it gets interesting. The payment came from the sale of a painting, The Garden at Giverny, by Claude Monet, sold through a private auction house in Charleston for $2.8 million. Jasper's heart stopped. He knew that painting. It had been Leora's most prized possession, inherited from her grandmother along with the pearl necklace. During their marriage, he'd tried to convince her to sell it multiple times, pointing out how much they could invest with that money. She'd always refused, saying it was the only connection she had left to her grandmother's memory. She'd sold her grandmother's Monet to pay for their children's medical care. "Jasper, you still there?" "I'm here." His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "The house she bought? She paid cash for that too. Used the remainder of the Monet money. She's been living modestly, working at the museum, putting every penny into providing for those kids." After hanging up, Jasper walked to the window and stared out at the Charleston skyline. Somewhere out there, in a yellow Victorian house with chalk drawings on the sidewalk, Leora was probably putting their children to bed, reading them stories, singing lullabies, being the kind of parent he'd never thought he wanted to be. His phone buzzed with notifications, emails about the Tokyo deal, messages from board members, reminders about tomorrow's conference calls with European investors. A week ago, these would have been the most important things in his world. Now they felt like noise. He thought about the night Leora left. He'd been in his study working on a merger proposal when he'd heard the front door close. He'd assumed she was going to one of her art gallery openings. She'd stopped asking him to accompany her months earlier. When he'd finally emerged from his study at midnight, he'd found her keys and wedding ring on the kitchen counter. He'd been angry at first. Angry that she'd left without explanation. Angry that she'd made him look foolish to his social circle. angry that she'd disrupted his perfectly ordered life. He'd convinced himself that she was being dramatic, that she'd come back when she realized how good she'd had it. But she'd been pregnant and scared, and facing the biggest decision of her life, and he'd been too absorbed in his own world to notice. The next morning, Jasper drove past the museum where Leora worked. The Brennan Museum of Fine Arts was a converted antebellum mansion with white columns and manicured gardens. Through the windows, he could see small groups of visitors admiring various exhibitions. He parked across the street and waited. At noon, she emerged for lunch, wearing a professional navy dress that somehow made her look both authoritative and approachable. She walked with purpose toward a small cafe 3 blocks away, and for a moment, Jasper considered following her. Instead, he sat in his car and watched her disappear around the corner, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd rebuilt her life from scratch. His phone rang again. This time it was his assistant. "Mr. Whitmore, the Tokyo investors are threatening to pull out if you don't return by Thursday. They're saying your absence shows lack of commitment to the deal." Jasper looked toward the cafe where his ex-wife was probably eating lunch, maybe scrolling through photos of their children on her phone, living a life he'd never bothered to understand. "Tell them I'll call them back," he said. "Sir, this deal is worth—" "I know what it's worth, I'll handle it." But as he ended the call, Jasper realized that for the first time in his adult life he wasn't sure that any deal, no matter how lucrative, was worth more than the chance to be in the same city as his children. The question was whether he had the courage to find out if there was still room for him in the life Leora had built without him. The next morning brought rain to Charleston, the kind of gentle southern shower that made the magnolia blossoms seem to glow against the gray sky. Jasper had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation he'd ever had with Leora about children, family, the future they'd never built together. He'd made a decision sometime around 3 a.m. He would go to the museum, not to confront her, not to demand answers, but simply to see her in her element, to understand who she'd become in the 2 years since she'd walked out of his life. The Brennan Museum was quieter than usual due to the weather. Jasper bought a ticket and wandered through the galleries, his expensive shoes clicking softly against the polished hardwood floors. The current exhibition was titled Southern Landscapes, Finding Beauty in the Ordinary, and as he moved from painting to painting, he began to understand why Leora had chosen this place. Every piece told a story of resilience, of finding extraordinary meaning in simple moments. A child's muddy footprints across a porch, an elderly woman tending to her garden, a father teaching his son to fish in a quiet creek. These weren't the avant-garde pieces that had filled their Manhattan penthouse. These were paintings that celebrated life as it was actually lived. "The brushwork in this piece is remarkable, isn't it?" Jasper froze. He knew that voice like he knew his own heartbeat. Slowly, he turned around, and there she was. Leora stood 3 feet away, her professional smile in place as she addressed what she clearly thought was just another museum visitor. She wore a charcoal gray blazer over a cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back in a low bun that revealed the graceful line of her neck. The pearl necklace was there, resting just above her collarbone like a quiet reminder of everything she'd sacrificed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jasper watched as recognition dawned in her green eyes, saw the exact second when her professional composure cracked, and something raw and vulnerable flickered across her features. Jasper. His name fell from her lips like a prayer or a curse, he couldn't tell which. "Hello, Leora." They stood in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by paintings of ordinary moments made extraordinary, while the weight of everything unsaid hung between them like a physical presence. Other visitors moved around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding in whispered voices. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was steadier than he'd expected, but he could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "I could ask you the same thing." He gestured toward the paintings. "This isn't exactly your usual style." A flash of something, anger, hurt, crossed her face. "You don't know what my style is anymore, Jasper. You never really did." The words hit him like a physical blow, but he absorbed them without flinching. She was right, and they both knew it. "Could we?" He looked around at the other visitors, acutely aware that they were creating a scene. "Could we talk somewhere private?" Leora hesitated, her professional training warring with personal history. Finally, she nodded toward a small office behind the main desk. 5 minutes. That's all. Her office was tiny but warm, filled with art books, family photos he couldn't quite see from his angle, and a small vase of fresh daisies on her desk. Everything about the space screamed contentment, the life of someone who'd found her place in the world. "How did you find me?" she asked, closing the door behind them. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Jasper reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph, placing it gently on her desk. Leora's face went pale as she stared at the image of herself holding Ezra and Mira. "Someone sent this to my office. No return address, no explanation. Just this." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, who would do that? I was hoping you could tell me." He studied her face, looking for any sign of deception, but all he saw was genuine shock and fear. "I don't understand. No one has pictures of us like this except—" She trailed off, her eyes widening. "Except who, Leora?" "My friend Celeste. She's a photographer. She took this about 6 months ago, but she would never. She doesn't even know about you, about our past. She thinks Ezra and Mira's father is—" She stopped herself, color rising in her cheeks. "Is what?" "Dead." The word came out in a whisper. "I told everyone their father died before they were born." It was easier than explaining why he was never around. Jasper felt like she'd slapped him. In her version of their story, he was already dead. Maybe, in a way, the man she'd married really had died, killed by ambition and neglect and the arrogant assumption that she would always be there waiting for him. "Are they mine, Leora?" She looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "Do you really need me to answer that? I need to hear you say it." "Yes." Her voice broke on the word. "Yes, they're yours. Ezra and Mira are your children, Jasper. The children you never wanted." The accusation hung in the air between them, true and cutting and impossible to defend against. "I never said I didn't want children. You didn't have to say it. Every canceled dinner, every postponed vacation, every time you chose work over us, you made it perfectly clear where your priorities were." Tears were gathering in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I spent 5 years waiting for you to choose me. Choose us. When I found out I was pregnant, I realized I was tired of waiting for a man who was never going to show up." Jasper wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that everything he'd done had been for their future. But looking at this woman who'd rebuilt her life from nothing, who'd raised his children alone while he'd been playing corporate games, all his explanations felt hollow. "I want to meet them," he said quietly. "No." The word was sharp, immediate. "Absolutely not. Leora, they're my children." "Are they?" She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with a fury he'd never seen before. "Children need more than DNA, Jasper. They need someone who shows up, someone who puts them first, someone who doesn't disappear when things get difficult." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You've been dead to them their entire lives. I won't let you confuse them now just because you've suddenly developed a conscience." Before he could respond, a knock interrupted them. A young intern peeked through the door. "Ms. Bennett? There's someone here asking for you specifically. Says it's urgent." Leora looked flustered. "I'll be right there." She turned back to Jasper. "You need to go, please." But as she moved toward the door, Jasper caught her arm gently. "This isn't over, Leora. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance. Just one chance to try to be the father they deserve." She pulled away from his touch like it burned. The father they deserve wouldn't have had to ask. As she walked away, leaving him alone in her small office, surrounded by the life she'd built without him, Jasper realized that winning back his family was going to be the hardest deal he'd ever tried to close. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he had what it took to succeed. Jasper sat in his hotel room that evening, staring at his untouched room service dinner and replaying every moment of his encounter with Leora. Her words echoed in his mind like accusations. "You've been dead to them their entire lives." The truth of it cut deeper than any business rival had ever managed. His phone rang, displaying an unknown Charleston number. "Mr. Whitmore?" The voice was female, older, with a refined southern accent that spoke of old Charleston money and older secrets. "Who is this?" "Someone who cares about Leora and those children more than you ever did." The caller paused, letting the words sink in. "Though I suppose that's not saying much, is it?" Jasper's grip tightened on the phone. "Did you send me the photograph?" "I did. And before you start threatening me with lawyers and private investigators, you should know that I'm calling to give you something you don't deserve. A chance." "What kind of chance?" "To prove you're not the selfish bastard who broke that girl's heart." The woman's voice was steady, matter of fact. "Meet me tomorrow at Magnolia Cemetery, Section 12 at 10 a.m. Come alone." and maybe you'll learn something about the family you abandoned." The line went dead before Jasper could respond. He spent the rest of the night researching Magnolia Cemetery, one of Charleston's historic graveyards filled with ornate monuments and Spanish moss-draped oaks. Section 12, according to the cemetery's website, housed graves dating back to the 1800s. What could this mysterious caller want to show him there? The next morning arrived gray and humid, typical Charleston weather that made even expensive suits feel heavy. Jasper arrived at the cemetery 15 minutes early, walking through the wrought iron gates into a world of marble angels and weathered headstones. Section 12 was in the older part of the cemetery, where massive oak trees created a canopy so thick that morning light filtered through in scattered golden patches. He found the woman waiting beside an elaborate Victorian monument, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the humidity, wearing a navy dress that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She was perhaps 70, with the kind of bone-deep elegance that money couldn't buy and age couldn't diminish. Her blue eyes, startlingly familiar blue eyes, assessed him with the cool precision of someone accustomed to taking the measure of men and finding them wanting. "You're exactly what I expected," she said without preamble. "Expensive clothes, expensive watch, expensive car parked outside the gates. Everything about you screams money and power. Tell me, Mr. Whitmore, what does any of that matter when you're standing in a graveyard? You have me at a disadvantage. You know who I am, but I don't know who you are. I'm Eleanor Bennett, Leora's grandmother." Jasper's blood went cold. Leora told me her grandmother was dead. To her, I am. Eleanor's voice carried decades of regret. "We had a falling out when she married you. I disapproved of the match. Thought you were too old, too set in your ways, too much like my own late husband who valued his business empire more than his family." She gestured toward the monument they stood beside. Jasper read the inscription. "Theodore Bennett, 1923-1998, beloved husband and father." Below it, a smaller stone. "Margaret Bennett, 1925 to 2019, reunited at last. My daughter Margaret, Leora's mother, died in a car accident when Leora was 16. I raised that girl from then on, and I loved her like she was my own daughter. But when she announced she was marrying you," Eleanor shook her head. "I said things, cruel things, things I can never take back." "What kind of things?" "I told her she was making the same mistake her mother made, falling for a man who would never put family first. I told her that wealthy men like you and Theodore collect beautiful wives like art pieces, something to display at parties but ignore at home." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "I told her she'd regret it within 5 years. Jasper felt sick. And she chose me anyway. She loved you. God help her, she truly loved you. So she cut me out of her life completely, returned my letters unopened, changed her phone number, moved across the country to be with you." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Do you know what it's like to lose the person you love most in the world because you were too proud to admit you might be wrong? I'm learning. When I heard about the divorce, I tried to reach out, but Leora wouldn't take my calls. Then I found out about the babies, about the medical bills, about her selling the Monet." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. That painting was supposed to be her inheritance, her security. "But she sold it to save your children's lives while you were off playing corporate games, completely oblivious. I didn't know she was pregnant." "Of course you didn't. You were too busy to notice your own wife, let alone what she was going through." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "But I've been watching, waiting, hoping for a chance to make things right." She handed him the envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Leora in the hospital, pale and exhausted after the emergency C-section. The twins in the NICU, tiny and fragile, hooked up to machines. Leora holding them for the first time, tears streaming down her face. First steps, first birthdays, Christmas mornings in the little yellow house. "How did you get these?" "I hired someone to document their lives. Not to interfere, just to know them, even from a distance. To be part of their story in the only way Leora would allow." Eleanor's voice broke. "Those children are my great-grandchildren, Mr. Whitmore. The only family I have left, and I've missed every moment of their lives because I was too stubborn to apologize when it mattered." Jasper stared at a photo of Mira taking her first steps in the museum where Leora worked, her face lit up with pure joy. "Why are you showing me this?" "Why now?" "Because I'm dying." The words were matter of fact, delivered without self-pity. "Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. And before I go, I want to do something right for once in my miserable life." "What does that have to do with me?" Eleanor smiled sadly. Everything, Mr. Whitmore. I sent you that photograph because I recognize myself in you. Someone who put pride before family, who thought there would always be more time to fix things. I'm hoping you're smarter than I was. Leora won't even let me see the children. Not yet, but she will. Eleanor pulled out another item from her purse, a small leather journal. This contains everything you need to know about Ezra and Mira. Their favorite foods, their fears, their dreams, their personalities. Study it like you would any business proposal you wanted to win. Jasper accepted the journal with trembling hands. Why would you help me? Because those children deserve to know their father, and Leora deserves to stop carrying the weight of parenthood alone. Because maybe if you succeed where I failed, some good can come from all this pain. Eleanor started walking toward the cemetery exit, then paused. And Mr. Whitmore, don't waste this chance. You may think you have all the time in the world, but I promise you, time runs out faster than you think. As Jasper watched her disappear among the moss-draped trees, he realized he'd been wrong about everything. The anonymous photograph hadn't been sent by an enemy trying to destroy his life. It had been sent by a dying woman trying to save it. Jasper spent the entire night reading Eleanor's journal, absorbing every detail about the children he'd never known. Ezra loved dinosaurs and refused to eat anything green, unless it was shaped like a car. Mira was afraid of thunderstorms but brave enough to chase butterflies across busy playgrounds. They both had Leora's habit of humming while they colored, and they shared an inexplicable fascination with construction vehicles. By dawn, he felt like he knew them better than he'd known most adults in his life. The journal also contained something else. Eleanor's observations about Leora's struggles. The sleepless nights during the twins' first year when Ezra had colic. The financial stress that had forced her to take on freelance art authentication work in addition to her museum job. The loneliness of raising two children without any family support, documented in painful detail by a grandmother who could only watch from afar. Jasper closed the journal and made a decision that would have shocked his former self. He called his office and formally delegated the Tokyo merger to his vice president. For the first time in his career, he was putting something ahead of a billion-dollar deal. The next morning, he drove to the children's daycare center. Eleanor had mentioned in the journal that Leora dropped them off every Tuesday and Thursday, while she worked late on new exhibitions. He wasn't planning to approach them. He just wanted to see them again, to reconcile the children in the photographs with the reality of their existence. Rainbow Gardens Daycare was a converted Victorian house with a colorful playground out back. Jasper parked across the street and waited, feeling like the world's most well-dressed stalker. At exactly 8:15 a.m., Leora's Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot. She emerged wearing jeans and a soft pink sweater, looking younger and more relaxed than she had at the museum. Ezra and Mira tumbled out of their car seats, chattering excitedly about something only they understood. Watching her interact with them was like seeing a completely different person. The serious guarded woman he'd encountered at the museum was replaced by someone warm and playful, someone who crouched down to their level to fix Mira's crooked ponytail and listened intently to Ezra's animated story about a dream involving dinosaurs and ice cream. "Mama, can we have pancakes for dinner?" Mira asked, tugging on Leora's hand. "We'll see, sweetheart. Remember, today is Miss Sarah's birthday, so you need to be extra good helpers." "I'm always a good helper," Ezra announced with the confident authority of a 2-year-old. Leora laughed, a sound that hit Jasper like a physical blow. He'd forgotten that laugh, the way it started low and bubbled up like champagne. During their marriage, he'd stopped being the kind of man who made her laugh. As she kissed them goodbye and watched them run toward the playground, Jasper saw something that made his chest tight. Leora stood there for a full minute, just watching them play, a small smile on her face that spoke of pure contentment mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. She was doing this alone. Every day, every night, every worry and joy and scraped knee and bedtime story, all of it rested on her shoulders. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop watching my daughter and grandchildren like a stalker. If you want to help, prove you're serious. EB." Jasper looked around, wondering where Eleanor was observing from, then typed back, "How?" The response came immediately. "Thursday afternoon. Mira has a doctor's appointment for her ear infection. Leora will have to close the museum early and lose half a day's pay. Fix it without her knowing it was you. An ear infection." Jasper flipped through the journal until he found Eleanor's notes about Mira's recurring ear problems, how Leora had spent countless nights holding her while she cried, how the medical bills kept piling up despite insurance. By noon, Jasper had made several phone calls. By 2 p.m. he was standing in the Brennan Museum facing a confused receptionist. "I'd like to make a donation," he told her. "Anonymous. Enough to fund a temporary assistant curator position for the rest of the year." "Sir, that's very generous, but donations of that size usually go through our board of directors." "I understand, but this needs to remain completely anonymous. No paperwork with my name, no recognition, nothing. Can you arrange that?" The receptionist, a young woman named Amy according to her name tag, looked uncertain. "I suppose I could speak with our director, but..." "Perfect. Here's my attorney's card. He'll handle all the legal details. The only condition is that the position starts immediately, and that it specifically supports whoever is curating the current Southern Landscapes exhibition." That evening, Jasper sat in a downtown Charleston restaurant, picking at a meal he couldn't taste while his phone rang with increasingly frantic calls from his board of directors. The Tokyo deal was falling apart without his direct involvement, and his absence was starting to make headlines in the financial press. Whitmore's disappearing act raises questions about leadership stability, read one news alert. Is Jasper Whitmore having a breakdown? Speculated another. For a man who'd built his reputation on being available 24/7, completely unreachable, his sudden unavailability was causing shockwaves throughout the business world. His stock price had dropped 3 points in 2 days. He should have cared. 6 months ago, he would have been on the next flight back to New York, would have worked around the clock to salvage the deal and his reputation. Instead, he found himself thinking about Mira's ear infection and whether the museum had called Leora yet about her mysterious new assistant. His phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. "Jasper, what the hell is going on? The entire financial world thinks you've lost your mind. Your board is talking about calling an emergency meeting. You need to get back to New York and do damage control." "I'm exactly where I need to be." "Doing what? Playing house with your ex-wife? She doesn't even want to see you." "I'm learning how to be a father." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Jasper thought the call had dropped. "Marcus? You're serious about this, aren't you? More serious than I've ever been about anything. Then you better figure out how to make it work, because if you don't get back to New York soon, you might not have a company to come back to." After hanging up, Jasper walked through Charleston's historic district, past the same streets where his children took their first steps, where Leora had built a life without him. The city was alive with the sounds of families, children playing, couples talking on restaurant patios, the kind of ordinary happiness he'd never thought to want. His phone buzzed with another text from Eleanor. She got the job. Cried when they told her about the anonymous donor. First time she's cried happy tears in 2 years. Well done. For the first time since receiving that photograph, Jasper smiled. He was learning that being a father had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with showing up, even if showing up meant losing everything else he'd spent his life building. The question was whether he was strong enough to keep choosing them over everything else, even when it felt like his entire world was falling apart. The crisis hit on Friday morning like a Category 5 hurricane. Jasper woke to 17 missed calls from his board chairman and a news alert that made his blood run cold. Whitmore Holdings stock plummets as CEO remains missing. Hostile takeover rumors swirl. He was getting dressed when his phone rang again. This time it was his attorney, David Chen, and his voice was grim. "Jasper, where the hell are you? Morrison Industries just announced they're considering a hostile takeover bid. They're claiming you've abandoned your fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders." Jasper sank onto the edge of his hotel bed. Morrison Industries was run by Richard Morrison, his biggest rival, and a man who'd been trying to acquire Whitmore Holdings for years. What's their angle? Mental incapacity. They're saying your disappearance and the collapse of the Tokyo deal prove you're no longer fit to run the company. The board is meeting Monday morning to discuss removing you as CEO. The words hit like physical blows. Everything he'd built over 15 years was crumbling, because he'd chosen to stay in Charleston for 1 week, because he'd finally chosen his family over his empire. "How much time do I have? If you get back to New York today, we might be able to stop this. But Jasper, it'll mean working around the clock, 20-hour days, emergency board meetings, probably traveling to Tokyo to salvage what's left of that deal. You won't have time for anything else." Anything else. As if his children were a hobby instead of the most important thing in his life. "I need to think about it." "There's nothing to think about. Get on a plane." But after hanging up, Jasper found himself walking to his car instead of packing. 20 minutes later, he was parked outside Rainbow Gardens daycare, watching Leora pick up Ezra and Mira. It was their Friday routine, according to Eleanor's journal. Playground time followed by pizza dinner at home. He watched Mira run to her mother with a drawing she'd made, her face glowing with pride as Leora examined every crayon stroke like it was a masterpiece. Ezra was telling an animated story about something that had happened during circle time, his hands gesturing wildly as Leora listened with complete attention. This was what he would be giving up, not just the abstract concept of having children, but these specific moments, Mira's artistic achievements, Ezra's stories, the way Leora's entire face lit up when she saw them. His phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. She knows something's wrong. Saw the news about your company. She's worried about you. Leora was worried about him. Even after everything he'd put her through, she still cared enough to worry. Another text arrived. This one from an unknown number. Mr. Whitmore, this is Celeste, Leora's friend. We need to talk. Meet me at the rooftop bar on King Street tonight at 8. Come alone. Celeste, the photographer who'd taken the original picture that started all of this. That evening, Jasper arrived at the upscale rooftop bar to find a woman in her early 30s waiting for him. Celeste had short auburn hair, intelligent brown eyes, and the kind of directness that reminded him of Leora. You are exactly what I expected, she said without preamble as he sat down. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything. Leora described you perfectly. Leora talks about me? Not often, but when she does. Celeste studied him over her wine glass. She still loves you. You know that, right? Jasper's heart clenched. She has a funny way of showing it. She's protecting herself and those kids. Celeste leaned forward. Do you know what she was like when she first moved here? Broken, completely shattered. She was 8 months pregnant, alone, and terrified. I found her crying in the grocery store because she couldn't afford both diapers and the medications the doctor prescribed for her blood pressure. I would have helped if I'd known. Would you? Really? Or would you have tried to control the situation, thrown money at it, and gone back to your meetings? Celeste's voice was sharp, because that's what she was afraid of, that you'd see the pregnancy as a problem to be managed instead of a family to be cherished. Jasper couldn't answer because he wasn't sure she was wrong. I was the one who helped her through labor, Celeste continued. 23 hours of complications, emergency surgery, and the whole time she kept saying your name. Even when the doctors weren't sure she was going to make it, she was worried about whether you were okay. The room seemed to spin around him. She almost died? The hemorrhaging was worse than anyone realized. For about 6 hours it was touch and go. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. And through all of it, she made me promise that if something happened to her, I wouldn't contact you. She said she couldn't bear the thought of you taking the babies out of obligation instead of love. Jasper felt like he was drowning. While he'd been in board meetings and conference calls, Leora had been fighting for her life and the lives of their children. While he'd been annoyed that she'd left without explanation, she'd been making the hardest decision any mother could make. Why are you telling me this? Because she's been different since you showed up. Distracted. Hopeful in a way that scares me. Celeste finished her wine and stood to leave. I took that picture you received. Eleanor asked me to. Said she needed it for something important. I had no idea she was going to send it to you. Then why did you want to meet me? To tell you that if you hurt her again, if you walk back into her life and then disappear when things get complicated, I will make your life a living hell. Leora Bennett is the strongest woman I know, but she's not unbreakable, and those children worship the ground she walks on. They don't need a part-time father who shows up when it's convenient. After Celeste left, Jasper sat alone on the rooftop, watching Charleston's twinkling lights reflect off the harbor. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from New York, each one more urgent than the last. At 11 p.m., he finally answered one. It was his board chairman. Jasper, thank God. Where are you? We've got Morrison breathing down our necks. The press is having a field day, and I need to ask you something. Jasper interrupted. In your opinion, what makes a man successful? What? Jasper, this isn't the time for philosophical discussions. Just answer the question. There was a pause. Money, power, building something that lasts. Why? And what about happiness? Family, being present for the people who matter most? Those are luxuries you can afford once you've secured your position. Right now, you need to focus on saving your company. Jasper looked out at the lights of Charleston, thinking about a yellow house with chalk drawings on the sidewalk, about 2 children who didn't know their father existed, about a woman who'd almost died bringing their babies into the world. What if I don't want to save it? What are you talking about? What if I'm tired of building an empire that requires me to sacrifice everything that actually matters? The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time in his adult life, Jasper Whitmore was considering the possibility that losing everything might be the only way to gain what truly mattered. But was he brave enough to find out? Jasper didn't sleep that night. He sat on his hotel balcony until dawn, watching the sun rise over Charleston Harbor while his phone buzzed incessantly with calls from New York. Each notification felt like a weight being added to his chest, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. By 6 a.m., he'd made his decision. At 7:30, he was standing outside Rainbow Gardens daycare, watching the early morning drop-offs. He knew Leora would be there soon. Eleanor's journal had mentioned that Saturdays were museum volunteer days, and Leora always brought the children early so she could help set up educational programs. When her Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot, Jasper's heart hammered against his ribs, but this time he didn't hide behind his car or observe from a distance. He walked directly toward them. Leora saw him coming and froze, her hand tightening protectively on Mira's car seat handle. Ezra, oblivious to the tension, was chattering about the toy dinosaur he'd brought for show and tell. Jasper. Her voice was carefully neutral, but he could see the worry in her green eyes. "What are you doing here? I needed to see you. To tell you something." He glanced at the children, both of whom were staring at him with the frank curiosity of toddlers encountering a stranger. "Could we talk just for a minute?" "Mama, who is that man?" Mira asked, pointing at Jasper with the directness only small children possessed. Leora's face went pale. He's someone Mama used to know." Ezra tilted his head, studying Jasper with intense focus. "He has the same chin as me." The observation hit like lightning. Even at 2 years old, Ezra could see what Jasper had been too blind to notice when he'd first seen the photograph. The child had inherited more than just his cleft chin. He had Jasper's analytical way of observing the world, the same intensity that had made Jasper successful in business. "You're right," Jasper said quietly, crouching down to Ezra's eye level. "We do have the same chin." "Cool. Do you like dinosaurs?" Before Jasper could answer, Leora intervened. "Ezra, Mira, why don't you go play on the swings for a few minutes? I need to talk to this gentleman." As the children ran toward the playground supervised by daycare staff, Leora turned to face him fully. "You need to leave. Now. Before they start asking questions I'm not ready to answer." "I can't do that." "Yes, you can. You did it once before." The accusation stung because it was true. "Leora, I know about the hemorrhaging, about how you almost died having them, about the medical bills, the nights you spent alone in the NICU, all of it." Her face crumpled for just a moment before she regained control. "Who told you?" "Does it matter? What matters is that I wasn't there. I should have been there, and I wasn't. And I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover how I feel about that. Sorry isn't enough." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you know what it was like? Being wheeled into surgery, not knowing if I was going to wake up, thinking my babies might grow up without any parents at all because their father didn't even know they existed." Jasper felt like she'd punched him in the gut. "If I could go back, but you can't. None of us can." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I saw the news, Jasper. Your company is falling apart. That's why you're really here, isn't it? Because your perfect life imploded and suddenly family seems like a good backup plan?" "No." The word came out stronger than he'd intended. "I'm here because I choose to be here. I'm here because for the first time in my adult life I understand what actually matters." "And what's that?" "Them." He gestured toward the playground where Ezra was pushing Mira on a swing, both of them laughing with pure joy. "You. This life you've built. I'm here because I'd rather lose everything else than miss another day of their childhood." Leora stared at him in shock. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not going back to New York. I'm saying I'm staying in Charleston, whether you want me here or not. I'm saying that if Morrison Industries wants my company, they can have it. Some things are more important than billion-dollar empires." "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more in my life." Jasper reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter he'd written at dawn. "This is my resignation as CEO of Whitmore Holdings. Effective immediately. I've already emailed it to my board chairman." Leora took the letter with trembling hands, scanning the formal language that essentially destroyed everything Jasper had spent 15 years building. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I'm liquidating my personal assets to pay off the company's debts so the employees won't lose their jobs when Morrison takes over. After that, I'll have enough to buy a small house here in Charleston, maybe start a consulting practice. Nothing fancy, nothing that requires 18-hour days or constant travel. Jasper, you can't just throw away your entire life. I'm not throwing it away. I'm finally choosing the right one. He stepped closer, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her perfume. I know I have no right to ask, and I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance. Not to be your husband. I understand that ship has sailed, but give me a chance to be their father, to be present, to show up, to put them first the way I should have from the beginning. Tears were streaming down her face now. You really mean this? I mean it. I love you, Leora. I never stopped loving you. But more than that, I want to love them. I want to know what makes Ezra laugh and what Mira dreams about. I want to teach them to ride bikes and help with homework and be the kind of father who never misses a birthday or a bedtime story. From the playground, Mira's voice called out, "Mama, the nice man is crying." They both looked toward the swings, where two pairs of bright blue eyes were watching them with concern. Even at their young age, Ezra and Mira could sense the emotional weight of the moment. "They're going to have questions," Leora said quietly. "Then we'll answer them. Together, if you'll let me." She was quiet for so long that Jasper began to think he'd lost, that his gesture was too little, too late, that some things couldn't be forgiven no matter how much you were willing to sacrifice. Finally, she spoke. "There's someone else you need to talk to first." "Who?" "Your grandmother-in-law. She's been calling me every day since you arrived in Charleston asking about you. I think it's time you two had a proper conversation." "Eleanor? You've been talking to Eleanor?" For the first time since he'd arrived, Leora almost smiled. "Did you really think she'd orchestrate this whole thing without having an exit strategy? She wants to meet with both of us tomorrow. She says it's time to stop letting pride destroy this family." As if summoned by their conversation, Jasper's phone rang. The caller ID showed his board chairman's number. For the first time in his adult life, Jasper declined the call without a second thought. Some decisions were more important than others, and this one would determine whether he'd spend the rest of his life building spreadsheets or building memories with the family he'd almost lost forever. The meeting was set for Sunday afternoon at Eleanor's estate on the outskirts of Charleston. As Jasper drove through the wrought iron gates and up the tree-lined driveway, he understood why Leora had fallen in love with the South. The antebellum mansion was surrounded by gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. Magnolia trees heavy with white blossoms, Spanish moss draping ancient oaks, and flowers blooming in every color imaginable. Eleanor was waiting on the front porch, but she wasn't alone. Leora sat in a white wicker chair beside her, looking nervous but determined. And on a blanket spread across the porch floor, Ezra and Mira were playing with a collection of wooden toys that looked like they'd been handed down through generations. "Daddy!" Mira called out as Jasper approached, then immediately clapped her hands over her mouth, her blue eyes wide with confusion. The word hit him like lightning. Daddy. She'd called him Daddy, and the sound of it nearly brought him to his knees. "It's okay, sweetheart," Leora said gently, though her own voice was shaky. "We talked about this, remember? This is your daddy. He's been away for a long time, but he's here now." Ezra looked up from his toy dinosaur, studying Jasper with the same intense focus he'd shown at the daycare. "Are you really our daddy?" Jasper knelt down beside the blanket, his throat so tight he could barely speak. "Yes, I'm your daddy, and I'm very sorry it took me so long to meet you." "Where were you?" Mira asked with the blunt curiosity of a 2-year-old. "I was lost," Jasper said, surprised by the honesty of his own answer. "But I'm not lost anymore." Eleanor cleared her throat, drawing their attention. "Children, why don't you show your father the garden? I planted those butterfly bushes specifically for little ones to explore." As Ezra and Mira scrambled off the blanket, chattering excitedly about butterflies and flowers, Jasper felt a small hand slip into his. Mira was looking up at him with complete trust, ready to lead him on an adventure. "Come on, Daddy. The purple flowers are the best." The next hour passed like a dream. Jasper found himself sitting in the grass, watching Ezra demonstrate how different dinosaurs moved, while Mira picked dandelions and presented them to him like precious gifts. They were perfect, funny and curious, and completely unguarded in the way only children could be. "You're good with them," Leora said quietly, sitting down beside him as the children chased butterflies near the garden fountain. "They're incredible. How did you do this alone? You find strength you didn't know you had." She was quiet for a moment, watching Mira try to catch a yellow butterfly. "Eleanor told me about your company, about Morrison Industries. It doesn't matter. Jasper, you can't just walk away from 15 years of work. Watch me." He turned to face her fully. "Do you know what I was thinking about during those board meetings that seemed so important? I was thinking about profit margins and market share and whether our stock price would hit certain targets. I was thinking about everything except what actually matters. Mira came running over, butterflyless but beaming. Daddy, did you see? I almost caught one. I saw. You're very fast. Jasper caught her as she launched herself into his arms, her small body fitting perfectly against his chest. The feeling was overwhelming, protective and tender and completely terrifying. Tell me about yourself, Mira. What's your favorite thing to do? I like to paint, and swing, and eat ice cream, and… She paused, considering seriously. And I like you, Daddy. The simple declaration nearly undid him. I like you too, sweetheart. Very much. Ezra appeared at his elbow, holding a stick he'd found. Daddy, this looks like a sword. Do you want to be knights with me? For the next 20 minutes, Jasper found himself engaged in an elaborate fantasy involving dragons, princesses, and the defense of the butterfly garden. He hadn't played pretend since he was Ezra's age, but somehow it felt natural, important in a way that board meetings never had. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor called them all to the porch for sweet tea and cookies. The children climbed onto Jasper's lap without hesitation, Mira on one knee and Ezra on the other, as if they'd been doing this their whole lives. There's something we need to discuss, Eleanor said, her voice carrying the weight of years. I'm dying. Eleanor, Leora started. No, let me finish. I've wasted too many years already. She looked directly at Jasper. I have maybe 3 months left. 3 months to fix the mistakes I made, to be the grandmother these children deserve. What are you saying? Jasper asked. I'm saying I want to change my will. Everything I have, this house, the remaining art collection, the trust funds, I want it to go to Ezra and Mira, but only if you three can figure out how to be a family again. The children were too young to understand the gravity of what their great-grandmother was saying, but Leora's face had gone pale. Eleanor, you can't. I can and I will. This house should be filled with children's laughter again. Those trust funds should pay for college educations and family vacations and all the things I was too proud to give you when you needed them most. Eleanor's voice broke slightly. I failed you once, Leora. I won't fail them. Jasper looked down at his children, who were contentedly eating cookies and getting crumbs on his expensive suit. Mira had fallen asleep against his chest, her small hand still clutching a dandelion. Ezra was quietly humming while he arranged his cookies into the shape of a dinosaur. This was what he'd been missing. Not just the big moments, birthdays and holidays and milestones, but these quiet, ordinary moments that made up the texture of family life. What would you need from me? He asked Leora quietly. Time, patience, proof that you're not going to disappear when things get difficult. She touched Mira's hair gently. They're good kids, but they're also 2-year-olds. There will be tantrums and sleepless nights and moments when you'll question everything. I know. Do you? Because parenting isn't a business deal you can negotiate your way out of. It's a lifetime commitment to putting someone else's needs ahead of your own every single day. Jasper looked out at the garden where he'd spent the afternoon playing knights and dragon slayers, where his children had accepted him without question or condition. I know I don't deserve this chance, he said. I know I have no right to ask you to trust me again, but I'm asking anyway. Not because I deserve it, but because they deserve to have a father who chooses them first. Leora was quiet for a long time, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the moss-draped trees. There's a house for sale 2 streets over from mine, she said finally. 3 bedrooms, needs work, but it has a good yard for children to play in. Jasper's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're serious about this, really serious, then we'll figure it out. One day at a time. No promises except that you'll keep showing up. I'll show up, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Every day, for the rest of my life, I'll show up. As if she'd been waiting for those exact words, Mira stirred in his arms and looked up at him with sleepy blue eyes. Daddy, will you read me a story tonight? Jasper looked at Leora, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, sweetheart. I'll read you as many stories as you want. And for the first time in his adult life, Jasper Whitmore made a promise he knew he'd never break. 2 years later, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the restored Victorian house on Magnolia Street, casting golden light across the breakfast table, where 4-year-old Ezra was carefully arranging his pancakes into the shape of a stegosaurus, while Mira painted her fingers with maple syrup, declaring herself a finger artist. Jasper stood at the stove, flipping pancakes and listening to his children's chatter about their upcoming day at preschool. He wore jeans and a simple blue button-down, his hair slightly mussed from Mira's enthusiastic morning hug. The expensive suits had been replaced by clothes that could survive playground adventures and impromptu art projects. "Daddy, can you make mine look like a butterfly?" Mira asked, holding up her syrup-covered hands. "Absolutely, sweetheart." Jasper carefully shaped her pancakes into butterfly wings, adding blueberries for spots. "There you go. A Mira butterfly, the most beautiful kind." She giggled, the sound filling the kitchen with pure joy. "You're silly, Daddy." "The silliest," he agreed, dropping a kiss on top of her head. Leora emerged from the hallway, dressed for work but moving with the unhurried pace of someone who no longer lived in constant stress. Her chestnut hair was longer now, falling in soft waves past her shoulders, and she wore the pearl necklace that had become her signature piece. The shadows under her eyes had disappeared, replaced by the glow of a woman who felt supported and loved. "Good morning, Chaos Coordinators," she said, kissing each child on the forehead before accepting the cup of coffee Jasper handed her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange and she smiled, the same smile that had made him fall in love with her 8 years ago. "Mama, look, Daddy made me a butterfly," Mira announced proudly. "I see that. It's beautiful." Leora caught Jasper's eye over their daughter's head, and something warm passed between them. They weren't married, not yet, but they were building something stronger than their previous relationship had ever been. Something based on presence rather than promises, on daily choices rather than grand gestures. The past 2 years hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights when teething toddlers became cranky preschoolers, moments when Jasper questioned whether he knew what he was doing, times when old patterns of work obsession tried to resurface. But he'd kept his promise. Every morning, every bedtime story, every scraped knee and proud achievement, he'd been there. His consulting firm, Whitmore Family Advisory, operated out of a small office downtown and specialized in helping family businesses balance success with actual family time. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd become an expert in work-life balance only after losing everything that had made his life unbalanced. Morrison Industries had indeed acquired Whitmore Holdings, but Jasper's careful transition planning had saved jobs and pensions. His former employees had sent him a card last Christmas, thanking him for ensuring their security even as he walked away from his empire. It remained one of his most treasured possessions. "Don't forget," Leora said, checking her phone. "Eleanor's doctor appointment is at 2 today." Eleanor had defied her prognosis, living well beyond the 3 months doctors had predicted. The doctors credited her renewed will to live. Having her great-grandchildren in her life had given her a reason to fight. She'd moved into the guest house behind their property 6 months ago, claiming she needed to supervise the children's education in proper Southern manners, but really just wanting to be close to the family she'd helped heal. "I'll pick her up at 1:30, Jasper confirmed. "The kids have art class until 3, so we should be back in time." "Art class?" Ezra suddenly remembered, jumping up from his chair. "I need my special dinosaur painting." As the children ran off to gather their school supplies, Leora and Jasper found themselves alone in the kitchen for the first time that morning. She moved closer, straightening his collar with the casual intimacy of someone who belonged in his space. "The Hendersons called last night," she said quietly, "about the wedding photography consultation. Celeste thinks it could lead to more work." Leora had started a side business documenting family milestones, not the stiff formal portraits that wealthy families typically commissioned, but real moments of connection and joy. Her work had become sought after throughout Charleston, with clients specifically requesting the photographer who could capture authentic emotion. "That's wonderful. You deserve all the success in the world." "We deserve it," she corrected gently. "This life we've built, we did it together." Before he could respond, Mira came barreling back into the kitchen, dragging her backpack behind her. "Daddy, will you walk me to school today?" "Wouldn't miss it, butterfly girl." Ezra appeared with his dinosaur painting, a masterpiece of 4-year-old artistry that Jasper genuinely found beautiful. "Can we practice baseball when I get home?" "Absolutely. I've been working on my catching." As they prepared to leave for school, Jasper caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the CEO who'd once valued board meetings over bedtime stories. This man had paint under his fingernails from last night's art project, grass stains on his jeans from weekend soccer games, and laugh lines around his eyes from countless moments of joy he'd almost missed. "Ready, team?" Leora called, gathering lunchboxes and school bags with the efficiency of someone who'd mastered the morning routine. As they walked down Magnolia Street toward the elementary school, Ezra holding his left hand and Mira skipping ahead while holding Leora's. Jasper marveled at how ordinary and extraordinary their life had become. Neighbors waved from their porches. Other parents fell into step beside them, and his children chattered about their plans for recess. This was what he'd traded his empire for: sidewalk conversations and butterfly pancakes, and the knowledge that when his children thought about their father, they'd remember someone who showed up. At the school gates, both children hugged him goodbye with the unconscious affection of kids who'd never doubted their father's love. As he watched them run toward their classrooms, Jasper felt Leora slip her hand into his. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing a conversation they'd had many times over the past 2 years. Jasper thought about his former life, the penthouse apartment, the private jets, the board meetings that had once seemed so crucial. Then he looked at the school where his children were learning to read and make friends, at the woman beside him who'd given him a second chance he'd never deserved, at the life they'd built from the ashes of his former ambitions. "Not a single one," he said, and meant it completely. As they walked home together, planning Eleanor's doctor visit and discussing weekend plans for a family trip to the beach, Jasper realized that success couldn't be measured in stock prices or profit margins. It could only be measured in moments like these: ordinary, precious, irreplaceable moments that money could never buy. He'd lost a billion-dollar empire but gained something infinitely more valuable: a family who loved him not for what he could provide, but for who he'd chosen to become. And that, he knew, was the best deal he'd ever made. Would you have had the courage to walk away from everything you'd built to save the relationships that truly mattered? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.